nation that is growing, that is increasingly moving to achieve greater definition. And so I just think it's really important to understand that. I think it's important to understand that we have this responsibility as revolutionaries. We are African International. We believe in revolution as the means by which we overturn the existing social system. And we believe that we have to assume a scientific approach to making that happen. And therefore, it's necessary for us to use certain tools, certain methods of investigation and analysis that we call historical, dialectical and historical materialism. This is something that was really perfected by somebody named Karl Marx, who had his own contradictions, obviously, but we felt like the method of investigation was really, really important. We see the limitations in Marx's investigation in the fact that he did not recognize the significance of what was happening in Haiti and many others. And so start history with things like the revolutionary history, a progressive history with things like the French Revolution and the Paris Commune. But what we know is that the Paris Commune, where the workers took power briefly in Paris, when they lost that in order to create that movement was crushed. Many of them were exiled into French colonies in like New Caledonia. And today, what we see is in New Caledonia, the children of the French Commune have taken power over the majority of the Black people who are native to that land and that territory. And part of the point being made is that colonialism is the primary driving force for the existence of this social system. And that in France, despite that you had left colonizers, you still had colonizers. And you had reactionary colonizers, you still had colonizers. And what we're seeing is that with the assault on Africa and the initiation of this trade in African people, the development of what Karl Marx called the primitive accumulation of capital, that was a startup, beginning process for capitalism itself. A whole new world system has come into existence, and it becomes impossible to look at France just by itself, and to look at what's happening in various other places around the world as this casual relationship between different countries and economies. We see the emergence of a whole new world system, a world economy. We're talking about a time frame where, again, we look at the French Revolution. We look at the Paris Commune. We're talking about a process that would see half of Mexico stolen. Like in what was that 1889? The assault that was made, the so-called struggle that was made with where France had to lose what half of what is now known as the United States. And when we say it had to lose half of the United States, we're talking about the indigenous people who occupied these territories had nothing to say about any of this, that where Roosevelt, not Roosevelt, but Jefferson actually purchased for $15 million from a desperate French government all of this territory. And then this is colonialism. This is the theft of the land and resources of the indigenous people, the theft of the land of the resources, half of Mexico. That's colonialism. That's the foundation for this entire system. 1898, the assault that stole Hawaii, the land that we characterize as Hawaii, was taken in 1898. When we look at the assault and the so-called Spanish-American War, where European powers, Spain and the United States, engaged in this war for colonial territories, that the United States didn't come into possession of Cuba, Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, etc. During this time frame. So we're looking at a time frame we're talking about primitive accumulation of capital, where all of these resources now coming together to build and consolidate the whole colonial capitalist world economy. And it's important for us to understand because we have been described as simply some kind of auxiliaries to footnotes to history that's been made by Europeans, whether they call themselves workers, whether they call themselves Marxists, or whether they just call themselves Adam Smith followers, etc. The fact is that the whole development of what we now know as capitalism came about as colonialism, and you can actually see it, and you can actually quantify it. You can see the emergence of this consolidated Europe, the consolidated European consciousness, the consolidation of a common economy that came to be known as capitalism, that we refer to more correctly as colonial capitalism. We say that colonialism was the mode of production that brought Europe, dragged Europe out of 1,000 years of feudal existence into the place where it is now. So when we see and understand what has happened in Haiti, and what is happening in Venezuela and Cuba and all of these other places, we're not looking at something new or abnormal. We're seeing a normal part of the process of the consolidation or the ongoing struggle to maintain a world that has its origin in colonial domination, and has at different times being known as the domination by the white man over the rest of the world. And concretely, that's what it is that we are looking at. That's what it is that we have to struggle against. And that's one of the reasons that the Haitian Revolution offers so many lessons for us that we need to learn, not the least of which was the fact that in Haiti, again, we saw the beginning of the consolidation of the African nation. And of course, and when I say that, I'm not saying that Africans didn't exist and didn't exist for thousands of years on the continent of Africa. What I'm saying is that we see the emergence of this process that happens in Haiti at the very same time that we see a process that's destroying the consolidation of the unity of Africa and African people. We see the emergence of this revolutionary project. And of course, the problem, a fundamental problem with Haiti and its consolidation of what it needed to do is the fact that it was in a process of having to do it more or less alone. At the same time, there were various cross currents of struggle happening in Haiti itself. That we see in Haiti also the raging class struggle that's happening within the struggle for national liberation. Sometimes this class struggle was characterized as a struggle that was being made with mulattoes or other forces, sometimes black as such, who engaged in solidarity, unity with France, even as this revolutionary project was made. And Haiti, this revolutionary, this remarkable movement of this island, this handful of people, more or less, if you look at just the population of African people in Haiti, how it's reshaped the whole world, how it challenged the existence of a capitalist system that was based on slavery, how it created a constitution that prohibited not only slavery, but prohibited the white man or the colonizers from owning any land on the continent of Haiti, and how it took the invasion of the United States Marines at gunpoint to force the election that was not accepted of somebody chosen by the United States to preside over Haiti. Forced at gunpoint, tried to impose a constitution that changed the laws that allowed the Europeans to own the land. This is something we're talking about happened under the leadership of a remarkable, well-known and respected President Woodrow Wilson, who was the same president who talked about how wonderful this movie that was made that held up. He called it something like something being written in lightning. This something of nations that was done many years ago. Unusual, and I challenge anybody to tell me a point in time where Africans who, first of all, were kidnapped and taught taken to Haiti lived without intervention, without attacks, without assaults, without murder, without an ongoing aggression being made to it that would make being under that bridge in Del Rio, Texas, unusual or peculiar. In fact, it was not unusual. It was not peculiar. It was ordinary when it comes to how Africans and colonized people, but Africans in particular, have been treated in the process of creating this and maintaining the social system that people refer to as capitalism, and we more appropriately recognize as colonial capitalism. And because we, as a consequence of the African people now having our own revolutionary party, we have possession of our own brains and we can define our own reality. And we know that Africa and African people did not play some minimal role in the advent of this whole capitalist system. We know that it was not something that happened with the Paris Commune that was remarkable, that helped to set terms for how revolution should be made. We know that this primitive accumulation that Karl Marx talked about, which included turning Africa into a war for the commercial hunting of black skins, is what we refer to as colonialism. And so we can identify our own significance, which is critical, because as recently as 1907, in Stuttgart, Germany, a meeting that has at least 60,000 white people attending this socialist conference, at 60,000 who participated in the outdoor event. There was a resolution that was passed at this Congress, this Congress of the Africans of the Communist International, that called for the creation of a socialist colonialism. That is to say, it fought against any resolution that Europe should get rid of colonialism under socialism, and said instead, recognize concretely, and then say, because we don't like black people, even though that was inferred of many of the statements that were made during that, but recognize what are we going to do with the surplus population we have in Europe? What are we going to do with the resources that we're developing that needs to be traded and sent to other places around the world? Where are we going to get these resources that go into production, etc.? And they indicated that colonialism was the answer, and that's what had to happen. And so this was the highest representative of the white world at this time that made this vote in 1907 in Stuttgart, Germany, during the Third International. So
hold on, comrades. We're gonna get started. I need to listen to that more. This chairman of Mobilization, the founder and leader of the African People's Socialist Party, leader of the International African Revolution. My name is Diop Olubala. I'm the facilitator of No Cop Zone Live, which is a weekly process that we hold as the Black is Back Coalition to provide leadership to the African community in the struggle against not only the symptoms of police occupation of our community, but against the police occupation of our community as a whole. And this is the basis of the demand for Black community control of the police. And the Black is Back Coalition, we understand that the primary problem that's facing African people is that of imperialism in terms of a particular organizational, economic, and political relationship that Black people inside U.S. borders have with the U.S. government and with the international parasitic colonial capitalist system. So, and that's important to say, as opposed to saying that the problem surrounding police is bad apples, spoiling bunches, or rogue cops, or cops with Nazi tattoos, or cops, whether or not they should wear body cameras or not, and all the other really trivial questions that are related to police activity in our community, but don't get to the critical question, because Black people are not being gunned down by police throughout this country because of the type of tattoo they have, or whether or not they have body cameras. And we've seen this in the results of numerous court cases or trials where police have been acquitted of murder of African people. I can name Markel McCullough in St. Petersburg, Florida in 2005. The police dumped dozens of rounds into this young African's, this teenage African's body, and the body camera wasn't working. And so even when they say they have to wear body cameras, they get away with murdering you by saying that the body camera that they supposed to wear was not working. So this is a reality that we can only explain through an anti-imperialist standpoint, being an imperialism, being a relationship, a domination of black people and other oppressed people around the world by white people, by Europe. Imperialism is the forced domination of our existence as Africans and other oppressed people by Europe and European state powers, including those in North America. We're talking about armies and military forces that hold entire populations at gunpoint as a means of advancing the political and economic interests of white power, of Europe and North America. So this is the problem that black people have with police in the U.S. It falls in that camp. You know, it's the relationship that police have to the black community here in North Philly and throughout oppressed communities around the country is no different than the relationship that the U.S. Marines were formerly had with the Afghan people before the Taliban led the successful military campaign to defeat U.S. imperialist troops, and therefore now have the power to control their own government and economy to a certain extent. But I say that to say that the struggle for black community control of the police is a struggle that recognizes what the Taliban recognize. And what the Taliban recognizes is that you can't pray your enemy away. You're gonna have to fight your enemy back. And so we stand in that camp. And that may be a certain kind of terminology that certain forces use in this period, but it wasn't always the stance. In fact, the Black is Back Coalition got its start in direct response and criticism of Barack Obama. And many of the same forces that claim to be anti-imperialist today were rooting for Barack Obama when he was running for office. But the Black is Back Coalition always was clear in terms of Barack Obama being representative of imperialism in the form of neocolonialism. So I say that to say that this is a stance that we have assumed consistently and without ever backing down. And that stance also includes that of the Black Community Control and Police Working Group. So in No Cop Zone, Black No Cop Zone, this is a forum that we do once a week. Right now it's once a week, every Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, as a way to conduct outreach to the people, whether you're on internet or even in the communities where we hold these sessions. And it's also designed to provide political education to help us understand what's going on in the world from our own perspective, as opposed to the perspective of the capitalist that writes the news stories. So it's important because in a lot of the questions that we deal with, you won't even necessarily know were in existence or relevant to our struggle for power and freedom as a people. So we do that. And we also hope that we are communicating with other anti-imperialist forces around the world who are active in the struggle against the military occupation and neo-colonial domination of their lives wherever they at. So we always checking for what's going on throughout the oppressed world. And today we're going to talk about Algeria. We're going to talk about Lebanon. We're going to talk about, of course, the situation in Del Rio, Texas. And we also are going to, of course, deal with the fundamental question that really ties it all together, which is the seizure of revolutionary power in the hands of the African working class right here within U.S. borders, in the belly of the beast. So the struggle that we engaged in on that front, on this front, has a lot to do with everything else that I just said we're going to talk about. And before I start anything up, I want to encourage everybody, and I got to make a self-criticism because I should have had the flyer that promotes the November 6th and 7th mobilization by Black is Back, with the title or the theme of which is deepening the resistance to police terror, honoring our Black political prisoners, Black community control of the police now. So this is a mobilization that the Black is Back Coalition is going to be holding on November 6th and 7th in Washington, D.C. And it's a very important mobilization, because I was just talking to my bro about our platform of Black is Back, where the demands of the fight are laid out, so that when the people fight, we are not just fighting in an aimless fashion, but we fight in accordance with particular political and economic demands that that speak to the interests of the African community. So, and the March on the White House is important forum where we will be projecting these demands to the international community and confronting the center, the headquarters of U.S. imperial power, which is the White House. So for more information or to register, please go to blackisbackcoalition.org. I want to salute and of course say uhuru to my political leadership and the leadership of the International African Revolution, Omali Yeshitela, who is the architect of the political philosophy of African internationalism, which is the philosophy and the philosophical underpinnings that inform the analysis that I put forth in this process known as Black No Cop Zone. So, and you know, we'll talk about what that means as we go along. I'm not really the type to, you know, do it like that, but it comes up. It comes up. And one thing I want to say off the rip, because like, as I stated, we're gonna be dealing with Algeria, Lebanon, Palestine. I'm sorry, I'm self-critical. That's the damn theme of the session, but there's a lot more that the flyer doesn't say that we're gonna talk about. But Algeria, Lebanon, Palestine are three areas that we're gonna be dealing with today. And some would refer to this particular territory I just described as the Middle East. But I want to be clear, and you know, for a long time in my own life, I just kind of, you know, it's the Middle East. Like, it's always been called the Middle East. But, you know, as I received political education from the party, I began to, you know, recognize and be educated as to the fact that all of the labels and places on this planet have political significance, and they have a history that also reflects the history of colonialism and imperialism in the world today. And for example, in Africa, you know, there's 54 different countries on the African continent right now, but that was not the case until the Berlin Conference in the 1880s, where all of the European imperialist powers literally had a meeting to decide who gets what, and they carved it up, and each country was given a name. So you have Nigeria, which means nigger area, some shit like that, the British control, and Cameroon, which is Portuguese for shrimp, you know, Ivory Coast. I mean, do we need to say anything else? So the point, and not just in Africa, but in so-called the West, so-called North and South America, even the name of these continents has political and economic significance. And because you got, you know, this place called the United States that wasn't always the size that it is today, but as a consequence of continued imperialist plunder, the United States government seized control of more and more parts of this continent. And you know, that's much of this place used to be part of Mexico, and of course before all that it was under the control of the indigenous people before capitalism emerged, which changes how we would identify this territory today, which is important to say to the cultural nationalists who just want to kind of duplicate what was the case prior to colonialism. But now we have a new situation, but we're going to talk about that. But the point is, it wasn't no Brazil, it wasn't no Puerto Rico, it wasn't no Dominican Republic, it wasn't no Panama. In fact, some of these territories used to be the same country prior to, you know, to the last 100 years, where imperialism, I believe it was Panama if I'm not mistaken, or Colombia and Venezuela, used to be the same country. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but you get the point. And the same thing goes for the Middle East, right? So, and I don't know if you've ever looked at the map of the Middle East, but you can Google it. And, there's a lot of maps of it that show you, like in terms of geography, it really isn't a separation between much of what they call the Middle East and the continent, or what they call the continent of Africa. So you got, but the term Middle East, according to the most popular Google response on Wikipedia, and this is true, the term Middle East definitely became widely known when American naval strategist Alfred Thayer Mahan used the term in 1902 to designate the area between Arabia and India. So prior to the early 1900s, it wasn't even called the Middle East. And if it wasn't for Europe's intervention, it may have been called Africa, or what we call Africa, And that's important to say, because many so-called Arab states in Northern Africa, or what some would call Arab states in Northern Africa, like Algeria, have united with the continental-wide struggle for the liberation and unification of Africa. So that's important to say as we advance in this discussion. The other thing to say is that, we do this because we have a responsibility to do this. I'm talking about no cap zone. And I wanted to have a friend of mine, he's a friend, a childhood friend of mine named Brian, who I met him in the 5th grade, I'm sure, 5th grade, in Bradley Elementary School in a city called El Paso, Texas. And I think at the time, my pops was in the military. He was definitely in the military when we moved to El Paso, but he got kicked out of the Army. He was the first lieutenant, and he went through the OCS process, which is for those who did not go to college, but instead ascended in the ranks of the military organization. So he went from like private to drill sergeant, whatever. And then he went to this place called OCS, Officer Something School, where then they became eligible to be a first lieutenant. And that's what he was at the time that he was basically expelled from the Army. And he was expelled, they say, for because he was stealing from a store, some shit. I don't know. But I do know that he got kicked out of the Army. And that was in the late 1980s, according to my mom's. And so I grew up there, more or less, from my age of 9 all the way to the time that I left to go to college in Austin, Texas. I lived in El Paso from 9 to like 18. And essentially, I spent my formative years there. And a lot of people ask me where I'm from. And throughout, my travels and organizing experiences, etc., people ask me where I'm from. And sometimes I tell them I'm from Brooklyn, because I was born in BK, and my family, all of my so-called familial roots is in Brooklyn. You know what I mean? And so, and also there was a certain, in my own brain, as a consequence of a certain kind of teasing that I endured as a youth, I kind of wanted to identify with Brooklyn more than I did El Paso. So it was rare, it would be rare where I would tell somebody I'm from El Paso. But as my unity with the International Socialist Revolution deepened, it became more clear to me that it's important that I recognize my relationship to that particular part of the country and the world, because El Paso is occupied Mexico. You know what I mean? In fact, the entire state of Texas is land that was stolen by the U.S. government as a consequence. Like, they literally invaded Mexico and stole the whole Texas, Colorado, Arizona, California, Nevada, etc. was stolen. You know what I mean? And that's not to say that it should have been Mexico to begin with, because what they called Mexico at the time that it was stolen by the U.S. government was a Mexico that was founded by Spaniards, as a settler colony. So it's not that we unite with the the identity of Mexico in the sense that we unite with Spanish European settler colonialism. But the fact is that the current geopolitical configurations that make up Mexico today came literally as a consequence of bloodshed of African people and indigenous people who not only fought the U.S. government to defend their land, but who fought to defend Africans who managed to escape colonial slavery in the U.S. And in fact, this was much of the reason why the U.S. invaded Mexico in the first place, because of its anti-imperialist stance. And it's important also to say that the Mexican government during this time, and I'm talking about like the 1840s, was led by a man, an African by the name of Vicente Guerrero, who, who was a revolutionary, and he was influenced by Jean-Jacques Dessalines and the Haitian Revolution that happened just 40 years prior to his emergence. And he united with Haiti's stance, and Mexico was liberated territory for Africans. So it's important that we recognize that even as we talk about the situation in Del Rio, Texas, but also in terms of my background, which I think is important that you know, and because I have responsibility to unite with the Mexican people in the struggle against U.S. settler colonialism, and not only because it's the politically principled thing to do, but these are real upstanding comrades, and these are my friends, and so it has a certain kind of significance for me, given that now I understand the political basis of the situation that they were and are confronted with right now. I think that it's important that we understand the history of Mexico and also what the Mexican liberation struggle looks like. And you should check out the video I was just playing from the party that was dealing with Haiti, because the revolutionary leadership of Mexico, of the Mexican liberation movement, was represented in that conference on Haiti by the African People's Socialist Party. So check that out. Somebody put up the link if you can. But anyway, I just wanted to say all that, and I wanted my friend Brian to talk about that. You know what I mean? And because what I don't want also is for my presentation of this background to be perceived in any way as an attempt to obscure any kind of relationship that I've had with U.S. colonial capitalism. And that's why I say about my pops, and there's really not much more I can say about that than that. And he got kicked out the army, and we was a working class African family. I don't know what to say about it outside of that, but it really doesn't matter, because in the final analysis, what we need to unite around is not where we from or how we grew up, but what our political stance is in the face of U.S. imperialism and white colonial oppression. So I think that that's important to say as well. But anyway, I wanted to have the comrade come on, my man, but I don't know if he's experiencing problems or what. But if you can hear me, I gave him the link, but I don't know. But anyway, so we're going to proceed in this discussion. So the first thing on the agenda is about Algeria. So the situation in Algeria is such that, there's been it's not growing tensions. The shit started tense, right? Where, because, France is one of those European forces that we discussed that was present at the Berlin Conference and that assumed control of many African countries, including Senegal and Ivory Coast, and, somebody help me out. Well, Algeria was one of them, Guinea, Conakry, et cetera, et cetera. And Guinea was one of them. And of course, in all these countries, people speak French and shit. And I'm sorry, Algeria was one of those countries that France had assumed control over. And so for a very long time, 200 years or so, the French controlled the government in Algeria, and everything. Like the president of Algeria or the governor was a white man, etc. They didn't even try to act like it wasn't what it was. It was straight up like the white man run all this shit kind of situation in Algeria and throughout all of Africa. So, and this is, you know, settler colonialism, where the white man, like the chairman say, where he invades and decides to stay, you know, and build an entire like economy that revolves around meeting the needs of their existence. So, as an extension of the empire, the French Empire. But anyway, so you know, France occupied and settled Algeria and ran the whole government and economy until the late 1950s, when the Algerian people organized a revolutionary struggle, an anti-colonial struggle, and forced Algeria, France out of Algeria. There's a really good movie called The Battle of Algiers. You should check it out, because it actually kind of, you know, it deals with some of the tactics and strategies that the Algerian resistance employed as a means of defeating the French. And they won. They won the struggle. And there's much more to be said in terms of what happened between the so-called Algerian independence and today. But although the struggle began in a very progressive fashion and under almost revolutionary and socialist leadership, and Ahmed Ben Bella, I believe, was the leading force. But over time, Algeria's economy has been, as any other so-called independent economy, been swallowed up by the reality of an entire international capitalist economy and imperialist state power that's all over the place. And so, and including its ability to impose a certain kind of neocolonialism on those territories that were once free. So, however, the stance of the Algerian government recently has been progressive and one of a certain type of resistance, where just a few days ago, Algeria banned the French from flying its airplanes, military airplanes, over Algerian airspace, which is a pretty heavy stance, because what they're saying is that if French Air Force, you know, military airplanes fly over the territory, then they will meet that with aggression. They will shoot it. So that's not a light thing. And this particular decision or directive that came down from Algeria's government is in response to an intensifying struggle that revolves primarily around the question of France's ongoing relationship with Algeria's economy, like we said before. Because recently, France has been rejecting Algerian nationals who are trying to move there. And the whole so-called immigration question is coming to a head in a certain kind of way throughout Europe. And one of the ways that is manifesting itself in France is France's policy on Algerian nationals moving to France from Algeria. So they're banning Algerians from entry into France now. And so Algeria and the French, and the reason why they're doing this, we're going to talk about that, because this is the critical question in terms of the parasitism. But to get to the point, so the French government under Macron, he has made several statements, white nationalist statements, that speak to the same kind of logic that France always uses as a justification for its extraction of our resources. And in this case, Macron said that if it wasn't for France colonizing y'all, then you would still be in a backward state. We civilized Algeria, is what the French said. Most recent, the French president said on record. So this really pissed off the Algerian government, and this, among other exchanges or struggles, resulted in Algeria's stance. But the thing that is significant about this particular struggle is not so much about the Algerian government stance, although it is, but what is most important for us to understand is the power of the people. Because France is just like all of imperialist white power, including the U.S. government, that is scared to death of this invasion of Negroes from Haiti and other parts of the world that will ultimately overcome their population and economy. And of course, you know, this is the subjective way this is the way that they put the line out in final analysis, because any layman that watches, and when I say layman, I mean like uninitiated person with no political education that will watch TV every day, and one day they see the U.S. government allowing all the Afghan refugees to enter the U.S., and the next day they see border patrol forces on horseback whipping Africans back into Mexico. So anybody that sees this has to try to process, and the objectively how anybody could understand this is anti-African stance, a special oppression of African people, and particularly the African working class, has the U.S. government has around the immigration question, and of course in general. That's the only conclusion, whether you think about it or not. The chairman was just talking about philosophy and how philosophy is, integrated throughout society, and you don't even know it. Like how Ghostface said, watch out for Haiti bitches. I've heard they throw hex, right? Like that is imperialist philosophy. Watch out for Haiti bitches. I heard they throw hex. That's imperialist philosophy. That's what white power. And I'm like, coming at Ghost it off. But we all know that at a particular time, African people had been even tried to be won to this stance around our own people. And like the chairman said, you can see so-called Haitians being beat down on the shores of Miami and not recognize that as your brother or yourself. And so the question of philosophy, and that's why we have to sum that up as it is in terms of, but that idea, that philosophical position that the U.S. government is putting forth around the Haiti question, it has a material basis, because it is upon the theft of the resources of African people in Haiti and around the world. That's the foundation upon which this entire capitalist system rests. And we all know that they make up laws, special laws for Black people all over the world. And they, whether said or not stated, the entire society is trained to view the African population in a negative light. We are criminalized, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a whole other discussion. But again, the material basis of this shit is the need for capitalist white power to hold on to the wealth that it stole, because it can't criminalize itself. It's never going to hold a press conference and make a self-criticism for having the U.S. Marines empty the Haitian treasury. And the same thing goes for all of France's colonies, including Algeria. And but again, the only thing that even moved the Algerian government that I can't say a whole lot about, but I will say that their stance is based in the fact that if they don't stand up for their people, and if they don't stand against the European and U.S., particularly European and French imperialism, then they're gonna have to deal with serious resistance on the ground from their own population. So that is the ongoing contradiction that the petty bourgeoisie, even as it may assume a patriotic stance, has to assume without suffering some kind of coup or other political ramifications. So it's important that we put that out in terms of what the real basis of the struggle that is occurring between Algeria and France right now. And there's a lot more that we can say about France and how dirty it is, but it's no different from. But it's important to say that it can't just be this anti-France thing, right? I'm talking about Algeria right now. Any colony of France. We cannot raise up France as the primary contradiction. The primary contradiction is imperialist capitalism, because the fact is that even if you wipe France out today, Algeria and all countries that were liberated from France would still be confronted with an international capitalist system, that and they would still be confronted with the question of how we're gonna run our society, reproduce quote unquote Algerian life, right? But of course it can't be no Algerian revolution. We'll talk about why. It has to be one African revolution. And this is why we are raised in the African revolution. must be led by the African working class. And if not the most, one of the most highly proletarianized sectors of international African working class is the domestically colonized African population within U.S. borders, from which the theory or in which the theory of African internationalism was developed. So we understand neocolonialism, counterinsurgency, and tactics and strategies of resistance, particularly against settler colonialism, better than anybody. But and more than that, the headquarters of all of imperialist capitalism is down Wall Street and these financial institutions in Washington, D.C. It's in North America. So it's a strategic front to bring down the entire imperialist capitalist system. And that's not to say that some petty bourgeoisie Negroes will not try to emerge or take the white man's place as the new indigenous capitalists. But that's why we do the work now to politically educate the people so that we are both in an organizational and ideological position to shut them down before they even try to rise up. So, and this is why we say that the Algerian government must unite with African internationalism. And it's just as Ben Bella said, in response to the question of South Africa and apartheid, and Ben Bella said we need to march on South Africa and start up a blood bank. When one of these other Negroes, I think from Malawi, said we should start up a bank. Ben Bella from Algeria said, no, what we need to do is start a blood bank on these crackers down in occupied Azania. And in the final analysis, that's what's going to have to happen to deal with the oppression that our people are fleeing from in Haiti. We're going to have to be able to send forces into Haiti to put down these little simple, disorganized neo-colonial thugs who are carrying out the will of imperialism, shooting our people and committing other atrocities. The chairman once said in a presentation on the U.S. Kidnapping of Jean-Bertrand Aristide in Haiti, the first democratically elected president in Haiti. The U.S. orchestrated his kidnapping and a coup to overturn Aristide so that they could ensure that the U.S. will always be in direct control of the Haitian government. And Chairman Amadi Shatella said the Bloods and the Crips out of Watts, L.A. Could deal with these punks in Haiti. And this is how we have to understand it. So even as we say stop the deportation, we also have to recognize that tell these Africans coming from Haiti or Mexico that if, even as you come into the U.S., understand that you coming into another hellhole. That the white man just look at what happened to Admiral Louima, so-called Haitian immigrant, where they stuck a plunger up his rectum and raped him, behind a nightclub. This is what the police did to this Haitian, right here in the U.S. So it's important that we understand that hell is everywhere, and we have to, more than anything, get organized where we are to take the offensive. So, but we wanted to say those things about Algeria because the situation in so-called North Africa and throughout the so-called Middle East, and you begin to understand more why I did that the disclaimer to explain, why we call it the Middle, or some call it the Middle East in the first place, because we are not loyal to the geopolitical definitions that imperialism imposes on us. And an argument can be made that the Middle East is Africa. But Ben Bella was clear that Algeria was Africa. And but either way, we see in the Middle East situation of potentially revolutionary potential, a situation that has revolutionary potential, in that there's serious, intense resistance and armed struggle that's occurring against between oppressed workers and the colonial forces itself. We're seeing like real ongoing armed struggle occurring between the Palestinian people and Israel. In fact, we're going to talk about the Israeli military or police raid that ended in the death of 5 members of Hamas. But you see the Taliban that beat the U.S. militarily, and of course you see throughout that region organizations that have an anti-imperialist stance, or certainly an anti-U.S. and European stance, even if that stance at this particular moment is being articulated through religious terminology. Objectively speaking, it's still resistance, and it's our responsibility to deepen the ideological capacity of the resistance that we see coming out of that region of the world. And this is part of why we want to talk about the situation in Afghanistan as well. I don't know if that's next, but we're gonna make it next because and then because there was you know, first of all, like when you know, the Taliban defeated the U.S. and you know, we congratulated the Taliban and we unite. And during the entire military campaign, we drew the comparisons between the resistance of the Afghani people against U.S. military occupation and the struggle against police occupation of the black community. So, and even as that has occurred in the defeat of the U.S., the Taliban worked with the U.S. government to facilitate the removal or the withdrawal of U.S. military forces and civilian forces that's tied to the military occupation, as well as forces tied to the Afghani government, and who was a neo-colonial Afghani government that worked alongside the U.S. government. So the Taliban coordinated with the U.S. government date, I think it was August 13th, where they had to get out, which, you know, that's how the terms they set. And from what we understand from all available information on media, that's how it went down. The U.S. has conceded to the Taliban, and the neo-colonial Afghani government has conceded. So the Taliban have the power. But even as that has occurred, there have been other struggles against U.S. imperialism and Afghani government or military forces by ISIS, who, according to all that we understand based on media, and I recognize that all of the information I get is on YouTube, although, you know, quote unquote, reputable media sources, CBS, and, you know, Al Jazeera, etc., you know, but at the same time, we know that ain't no such thing as an unbiased media. So whatever information I get from these reports, obviously we have to always recognize that it could be inaccurate, tainted, or things of this nature. But based on what we know, ISIS has struggles, ideological struggles based in their understanding of how Islamic State should be established in Afghanistan or anywhere else. They have ideological differences with the Taliban around this question and have acted against U.S. military and Afghani neo-colonial military forces independent of the will of the Taliban. And there was recently bombing in a masjid in Kabul in Afghanistan. After the Taliban have won the power, bombing has occurred. And again, we don't, could have been CIA. It probably was CIA, you know? But the reality is that the only way to ensure the maximum security for Afghanistan and the Afghani people and any other newly liberated people is to consolidate revolutionary party workers in arms, right? The government must be controlled by an organization or a political party or whatever you want to call it, an organization that is organized around democratic centralist principles that ensure that the interests of the workers are implemented in the actual economic and political and social policy of that society. You know, that's part of what socialism means. And when the society is organized around subjective types of standards, and we have to say that religion, if you want to call it that, but there's a high degree of subjectivity that is involved in coming to conclusions on how any given quote unquote religious text or doctrine should be carried out in society. And in fact, it is a known fact that the Taliban have changed its stance on a number of questions, including that of how women can function in Afghani society. Their stance has changed. And the point is that there must be a struggle for science, right? And to identify sin as exploitation and social oppression within our society as a whole, unless it is the oppression of forces that carry out economic and other violations against the interests of the people. So it's important to say that, because outside of that, the U.S. or any other foreign force can easily instigate contradictions within Afghani society if the only basis of unity is religion and other subjective kinds of principles, because that's almost as good as saying that I unite with somebody because we have the same, we related to each other. I don't give a damn if I'm related. In fact, I ain't talked to my pops since I was 20. I'm like in over 20 years. And much of that to this day is based on the fact that, what is his relationship with imperialism? I don't know. But at one time, he was in the army, and I don't know what his stance on that shit is today. You know what I'm saying? But more than that, how we relate to one another has a political basis, and this is what the point is. How we unite cannot ever be based on, oh, I grew up with them, therefore I unite with them, or they my family, and therefore I grew up with them. Maybe it's different because, social economic stuff, but you know what I'm saying? That's not socialism. That's not how revolution is won. You unite with forces based on their political stance, right? So if you my brother and you decide to join the Philadelphia Police Department, then you my enemy. I don't care if we share the same blood. So these are the types of principles and science that African internationalism and revolution and socialism enables us to introduce into society, and that in itself will serve as a tremendous security for the newly founded Afghani state and government and of the Afghani people and the Taliban, under the leadership of the Taliban. So that's important to say. Also, we want to talk about Lebanon. So the situation in Lebanon, which is also in the so-called Middle East. And you have a situation where Lebanon is, according to, U.S. and imperialist media, is on the serious campaign. And I'm really trying to understand why, because this is an example of how they will manipulate information and situations around the world to serve their own particular interests. Like, for example, at one time, the U.S. media, everywhere you turn, like right before 9/11 and when they invaded Afghanistan, there was a whole ideology, like a propaganda media campaign around the Taliban's abusive treatment of women. And you're always seeing these images of women and all, covered up, and they don't got no rights and all this stuff and all that. You know what I'm saying? As if the U.S. government has ever respected the rights of African women. You know what I mean? So it is obviously in no place to make any kind of criticism of the Taliban or anybody else. But the point is that you have in Lebanon a situation where the media is saying that Lebanon is experiencing deep and profound, what they call a deep and profound economic crisis. And there's a lot of, I took some notes on this, and because this shit right here, it speaks to the question of neocolonialism in the so-called Middle East. And it's the neocolonialists that will fight for the existence of the Middle East, quiet as it's kept. But check it out. So you have a serious situation in Lebanon where I'm gonna read this quote for y'all. Lebanon is experiencing deep economic crisis. 78% of Lebanese citizens live below the poverty line, and 36% live in extreme poverty. right? And this is a situation that has really made the conditions in Lebanese society very volatile. There's been a number of clashes between the people and the Lebanese state, you know, even as the Lebanese state claim and takes a very liberal back and forth fence riding kind of stance, but it won't throw Hezbollah under the bus all the way. But that's again because the people won't have that, you know. And this is also again speaks to the significance of the power of the workers, of the people, which and we can see in Lebanon, the workers move the hand of the Lebanese government. But the point is that now, because Hezbollah, which is one of the most active and largest anti-imperialist militant organizations in the so-called Middle East, alongside Hamas, who both of whom are strictly opposed to the existence of the illegitimate settler colonial Israeli state and government. And like I said earlier, Hezbollah is and Hamas is engaged in literal armed struggle with the Israeli military in the control for that land. And the Lebanese and Hezbollah has a very large base in Lebanon and is, as a consequence, very influential in the statements and actions of the Lebanese government. And there's been a number of examples in which the Lebanese government has essentially been put in a situation where it either has to unite with Hezbollah or it has to unite with white power and neocolonialism in that region. And it has chosen to not attack Hezbollah. And this has been a problem for U.S. imperialism, which is the foundation. It is the reason why Israel exists in the first place. And again, Israel is the strategic target of Hezbollah, and the Lebanese government will not denounce Hezbollah, and therefore the neo-colonial forces in Middle East are now being told by their white bosses in the U.S. and in Europe that y'all need to discipline Lebanon. And so as a consequence, the organization, the neo-colonial organization in the Middle East known as the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC. And this is it's kind of like ECOWAS in West Africa. Anyway, the GCCC is basically a coalition of all the Uncle Tom governments in the so-called Middle East. And what unites them all is their strategic position or their strategic relationship to the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, which is very important for capitalist, imperialist capitalism to control in order to extract oil and, you know, other important factors of political economy in that region. So the GCC has been told by the U.S. got on the phone, and Saudi Arabia is the lead Uncle Tom in that region. And the U.S., you know, Biden and them got on the phone and said, yo, Hezbollah on that shit again. Y'all need to discipline them. So subsequently, GCC has removed or withdrawn the economic support that it once provided for Lebanon. And that's important to recognize, because this is the same thing, y'all. In every colony all over the world, what makes us colonies, and I don't say us like I'm proud of this shit, but I can't say them because we a colony right here. But part of the distinguishing feature of a colony or colonial relationship is that it controls how you make your money. So under a free situation, for example, in Africa, if it wasn't for white power's military domination control of our governments throughout the continent, then Africa would have the ability to feed itself forever. Like Africa has everything it needs. It may not have everything in one country, but again, those countries was defined by imperialism, right? And they was defined because the imperialists leaves that particular spot. If they can have it all, they would, but they got to split it up. So, all right, Nigeria, The British control that, and the only reason why the only real reason the British have for Nigeria is oil, for example. And so the British will impose a certain kind of economic relationship, especially after so-called liberation struggles were won in the 60s and the 50s. The British will now impose a situation where the only thing, because it still controls the government and the economy, and the only thing that Nigeria will be able to produce is oil, even though it has the ability to produce agriculture and other things that we would need to live, etc. But it's not as though we control the means through which we would turn raw materials into what we need. We don't have no factories to turn the bauxite into steel. We don't, you know what I mean? So we are in a situation where we have to, all the business occurs between the colony and the colonizer. But the business is always on the colonizer's terms. So yeah, they'll buy your oil, but they're not gonna give you nothing for it. You know what I mean? It's more like a gratuity, so to speak, or to enable you to keep the appearance that you have a presidential palace or some shit. But the point is that this is the type of situation that is imposed on every colonial territory, including Lebanon. And so now the only means through which the Lebanese economy can function is through the resources that the empire funnels back into Lebanon's economy via the Gulf Cooperation Council. And a significant amount of, trade and other, commerce that in Lebanon was done, had the GCC had something to do with it. And so I'm gonna read this thing. It's from like a real, I never heard of this website, but it's like a think tank type thing. So since 2016, the once significant financial support of Gulf Arab countries for Lebanon has slowed to a trickle. Listen, y'all, before I do anything, I need forces to help me because, you know what I mean? Like, this cannot be just Diop doing this shit, man. We need to have forces on the ground, and I'm gonna work on that, you know what I'm saying, in terms of, because we're gonna talk about our campaign of resistance on the ground here. But also, those of you who are watching, we need for forces, because we should be doing a PowerPoint, you know what I mean? So I'm on YouTube with my man OC and my comrade OC, and he has a lot of people watching right now. And I just want to let y'all know that this has got to go beyond just a discussion where we have to actually, build some kind of organizational capacity to build on what we're doing and to ultimately put organization on the ground in the communities where you come from. Because this is not just about like, learning some shit or, oh, that's interesting and you go on with your life. We want to build organization. That's why I said, make it to DC on November 6th or 7th. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah. So the GCC, so if you are interested, I want y'all to take down my phone number, 215-606-8327. It's on the thing, but I'll say it again, 215-606-8327. Please send me a text or call, and if you want to help, get information together and start like moving on some of the things that we're talking about. And if you want to come to the march, go to blackisblackcoalition.org, or you can call me for more information. I'll give it to you. All right, please do, because again, this cannot just be a session where we just talking and shit like, you know what I'm saying? We have to really keep our objectives in front of us, and the most of which is to actually build an organization. So with that said, so the GCC, I'm gonna read this thing for y'all. But the only reason why I'm talking about any of this shit, because you gotta understand what's going on in the world, and we have to also understand, put yourself in a position, y'all, where let's just say all the revolutionaries on the planet Earth died today or tomorrow, and you're the only revolutionary left on the planet. You have a responsibility to make shit happen for your people. You know what I'm saying? You got to keep the spear lit. So, and part of that means, like, look, you go back and you look at the Burning Spear newspaper, right? The Burning Spear. I got a couple copies. Hold on. You go back, this is the Burning Spear newspaper, the media organ of the African People's Socialist Party. But the party kept the spear going, like on the serious, essentially the last man standing, Chairman Amali Yeshitela. And as African revolutionaries getting gunned down throughout the US, locked up, etc. And the militant capacity of the community, organizational capacity of the community was like severely damaged, as a consequence of this counterinsurgency. So, but the party kept it live, and part of what they did, like you go back and you read, this shit been out since 1968, the Burning Spear newspaper, man. And you go back and you read some of the copies of the Spear from after the party's founding, like in 72, 73, and you look at like the care and like the detail and shit, like these older Spears especially, but even of course the current Spear, but what I'm saying is that these comrades, chairman and others who kept this shit going, acted like the African Revolution is the leadership of the International Socialist Revolution. Even as our numbers would dwindle down to a handful, the party's stance has always been one of, a commitment to a certain kind of responsibility. That, obviously, well, the point is that, so the reason why we do this Black No Cop Zone is because this is the stance that we want to fight for. So we don't just gather around to talk about what's going on in Lebanon because we like to talk about the shit. In fact, if it wasn't for having to do this, I wouldn't really read that much at all, to be honest. But I recognize that we have a responsibility to stay educated and informed on everything going on in our community and going on in society as a whole, because if I'm put in a position where I'm the only one that can represent the African Revolution, I want to make sure that I'm as fully armed and equipped to do so as possible. And you can't represent the movement really the best way if you don't know what's going on in the world. So, because people gonna ask you stuff like as you start doing your outreach, and of course now you do have the Spear and you have your organizational tools, but you may not always have that kind of aid and support, and you may have to sum up a question right where you at, and you have this party's platform, of course, and so anyway, the point is that so this is why we talking about this shit. I don't know if it's exciting to y'all, but it's not necessarily exciting to me. I'm not like a scholar or an analyst as such. I'm a practical revolutionary, and I see this particular process as a kind of like a chore, as in not in a bad way, but as we wash our face every morning, and self-criticize and keep our shit together. We also have to keep our our understanding up to date, so to speak. So since 2016, the once significant financial support of Gulf Arab countries for Lebanon has slowed into a trickle. Between 2003 and 2015, 76% of foreign direct investment in Lebanon came from the Gulf states. Over the past decade, you heard that? 70%, 70%, 76% of foreign direct investment in Lebanon came from the Gulf states. For 76% of Lebanon's, essentially of Lebanon's money, and the money that the people have access to, came from this neo-colonial institution that now has removed that support as a punishment for Lebanese government's refusal to denounce Hezbollah, and really for its refusal to denounce the illegitimate settler colonial Israeli state. That's why Lebanon is catching these consequences. So that's important for us to understand. And the Lebanese government could take the Uncle Tom route and just join back in with the GCC, but it refuses to do so, and it has to be saluted for that. But again, what must always be understood is that the Lebanese government, its stance is based in the power of the people, because it's the people that won't allow the Uncle Tom to sell out, so to speak, even if they wanted to. The people hold the government accountable, and but one contradiction now that the Lebanese government, because you can't necessarily criticize it because took in the right stance, at least as it relates to the question of European and Israeli, imperialism and shit like that. I mean, Lebanon been sturdy, but what part of why U.S. media, imperialist media, is talking about this economic crisis, because they making this shit sound like it's like this catastrophe, like unseen before. They said the worst economic crisis on the planet Earth in the last 150 years. And they talk about how there's limited electricity. Go to Sierra Leone, it ain't no electricity. You know what I mean? So the point is that imperialist account or explanation of reporting on this economic crisis, they're lying in a lot of different ways. But that's not to say that this crisis is not real. And the numbers don't lie. 78% of the Lebanese people lives below the poverty line, and 38% is in extreme poverty. And they can't lie about that. But the point is that the Lebanese people, they can't lie about that. But what must be said more than anything about I lost my train of thought. I'm listening to these guys, man. The Lebanese, let's see here. I'm gonna catch it again. I could have lost my train of thought. I'll get back to it, but one thing that must be understood is that there's no way forward through the Lebanese government as it exists. The only way forward is for this resistance that we see coming out of the various fronts of the so-called Middle East, uniting around revolutionary and socialist principles. That's the reality. And you know, we can try to evade that fact if we want to, but that's what it comes down to, and that goes for Afghanistan and the Taliban as well. We have to struggle for socialist analysis and how things are developing and how the people need to move. And we salute again the Lebanese government for its stance of opposition to its refusal to sell out the resistance. And but more than that, I think what must be said more than anything is that the resistance needs to unite, and it needs to unite under revolutionary principles. And what I would offer up is the possibility or the consideration that the so-called resistance or revolution or anti-colonial struggles, I should say, that are occurring in the Middle East somehow find a relationship with the African Revolution. And again, on an economic level, because when we this deals with a few contradictions. One is the contradiction that the Taliban is dealing with right now in Afghanistan. You know what I mean? In terms of the subjective struggles, and which breeds snitchism and gives you know, it creates the conditions for a certain kind of subjective struggles and fracturing of Afghani society. So but revolutionary theory and organization can eliminate that contradiction, and we need to struggle for that type of understanding in every front of anti-colonial resistance that we see occurring around the world. So that's important for us to say. The other thing that we want to deal with, and this goes for the entire region. Now, the last thing we want to talk about is the question of what's going on in the U.S. And I admit this is not like a fiery speech and shit, but what it is factually on point, and the line that we putting out is on point. And I guarantee you, if you put a brick in my fucking hand and say go around the corner with that, you guarantee that shit gonna happen. That is one thing that you can fucking guarantee. And that leads us to the final aspect of our discussion, and that discussion would be that as it relates to well, not the final, next to last. We're talking about Palestine. So last on September 26th, Israeli troops killed 5 Hamas militants in gun battles during raids on Sunday against one of the group's cells in the occupied West Bank, an Israeli military spokesman said. And I got this off of a news article on Reuters network, but that's what happened on, it was, I think, a Sunday, September 26th. And, you know, it's important, and that's a shootout that occurred between Hamas and the Israeli military or Israeli police. And that's important to know, because the people of Palestine have been fighting the Israeli occupation for a very long time, since the mid-1960s, and taking tremendous losses all the way, but have never lost their commitment to fight. And that's important for us to understand. But again, it also underscores the importance of revolutionary theory and organization and developing tactics and strategies that would enable us to have concrete relationship with that resistance. We unite with the resistance of the Palestinian people against Israeli military occupation. And part of the reason why we do the work of Black community control of the police is because we are opposed to imperialism as a whole. And every struggle that we make in the name of Black community control of the police is also a struggle against the Israeli occupation of Palestine right now. And that's not the stance that's assumed by everybody, but that's our stance. And part of what we want to talk about as we close this out is, and there's not much more we can say. The land should be returned to Palestine. And no, what do they call it? Two-state solution that the Palestinian Authority is trying to put forth. Ain't no two-state solution. We're talking about return of the land to the Palestinian people and organizing socialism throughout their region. And the last thing we want to talk about is the struggles, the internal or domestic colony of the dynamics going on here. And one of those things includes recent study or recent report that came out, because okay, my man Brian, I don't know, he texted me, but anyway, the last thing I want to talk about. So it turns out that there's 17,100 more deaths of police, Africans being killed by the police in this country than they previously announced. And there's a whole article about it that really, if you can, check it out. And the headline is that of the researchers estimate that 17,100 deaths from police violence. If you look that up, but check this out. At one time, we thought that according to a study done by the Malcolm X grassroots movement, they came up with the number of 1.5 or 2 Africans is killed by the police every day in the United States. So, and that was a number that we pretty much went by as a movement. However, those numbers that the Malcolm X grassroots movement had came up with did not consider, because it was based on reports that come in from the police organizations themselves. There's the ability, in fact, there was a big thing about it when Ferguson happened, how police organizations are required to report on anybody they shoot. And it came out later on in this article that essentially they were lying, and that the numbers are twice what they previously thought. So that means that when Malcolm X grassroots movement was saying that 2 Africans killed every day, now is we have to understand that 4 Africans is killed by the police every day. But more than that, part of what we want to say is that the police, again, is a military occupying force in our community. And there's really not much more we can say beyond the fact that in some form or fashion, they should be met with resistance from the people. And that's not to say that that resistance will look the same everywhere that it occurs, but it is to say that it should be resistance and that the community should get organized to carry it out. Now, my most immediate recommendation or proposal is that police cars and equipment come under assault by the community with rocks, bricks, and anything else you can get your hands on. But what should be understood is that the objective of this resistance is to deconstruct the colonial state. And we recognize that in the final analysis, they can always get another car. They can always replace a window. And in the final analysis, we have to engage and struggle to get the power to remove the police from our oppressed and exploited community. And that is the basis, should be the basis of all the work that we carry out in our communities, to lead the people and to incite that type of stance among the people ourselves. So we try to show and prove through our actions, and of course through the analysis that we provide. And if you want to be part of this work, I want to really encourage you to get in touch with myself, 215-606-8327, and I can provide you with some degree of leadership, and also join the blackisbackcoalition.org. Go to blackisbackcoalition.org. And you know, I don't really know what else to say. It's you know, all of what but what I will say is that all of what we just discussed in terms of from Algeria to Lebanon, to Haiti, to Mexico, all of these struggles that we are discussing, Afghanistan, the strategic enemy of all oppressed peoples around the world is U.S. imperialism itself. And we have a responsibility, not a responsibility, but part of what we are engaged in the struggle is to build anti-imperialist organization in the African community itself. And it's, you know, it's something like what the Black Panthers had in terms of what it's going to take to deal not only with the military occupation of the community, but also on a more advanced level to govern the African community in a coordinated way with other oppressed peoples around the world. I'm not in an organizational position to really speak to how that could and should look, but I know that that's what needs to happen, where we control the way that we make a living, etc. We are in control as workers, are in control of the economic policies under which we exist, and this has to happen under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. You know, so that's what I want to offer up. Come out to the joint, man. November 6th and 7th. Let's see.
Don't never do that.
All right, so we got a few discussions. We got I Am Energy says that Mexican people don't like me, and I'm in Texas. Are you there, I Am Energy? Are you white? That'll be my first question to I Am Energy. I Am Energy says Mexican people don't like me, and I'm in Texas. So my question to you is, are you white? Because that might be the reason. Let me see what Brian's talking about.
Every year will but nothing. He talking about monetary. He told me that.
Y'all can hang out if you want. I'm gonna try to get Brian on.
You don't even know that. It's expecting that he wouldn't move
Y'all can hang out. I'm trying to work this out with Brian Elio. I don't know what to say, let's see.
Man, come on, man, come on, man. Whoa, I got one right here.
Anyway, I said what needed to be said anyway. All right, y'all. That's really all I have to offer up. Any discussion? Huru, Maiza, Wenge, Nda, Huru. Anybody else? All right. Thanks for tuning in to Huru.
We're going to stop them avenue, man. We're going to stop that. Stop them on the You know, I call you all the time. Work all that. You come up here, you go around that corner. I don't give a damn. So I know. Talk to you and talk to I know my people up here. Stop it, man. I'm not that guy. We all moving up here. It's your bed, come on, move. That's all I'm saying. Y'all must be all you want.
Socialism has never worked.
Your bed, man, come on out. We ain't going out. Go home here for it. It's your bed, man.
I'm just looking at the comments. I don't know if there's any discussion. All right.
Nobody hear what I said.